In this lecture, I will discuss when and how the specific subject being investigated or the research method being followed raise ethical issues that must be carefully examined by the researcher and may require special action. This concern is traditionally well understood in the case of medical sciences, which often involve human participants. The ethical implications of research involving human subjects can also be relevant in social sciences. Physicists have long been debating the ethical implication of research that can lead to the development of mass destruction weapons. Today, ethical issues increasingly arise in almost all research areas for two main reasons. First, transition from research to technology occurs at an increasingly high speed. Second, technological developments more and more directly involve and affect humans in their private life, in relation with other humans, and with society. Researchers can no longer ignore that their work can have ethical implications. This is the subject of this lecture. The debate on possible ethical implications of a specific research has often originated heated discussions among scientists. The beginning can be traced back to the end of World War II. Physicists started passionate discussions on the relation between research and war because the scientific contributions of eminent physicists in the Manhattan Project led to the development of the nuclear bomb. In 1945, in Nuremberg, Germany, a series of trials were held against war criminals. In one of the trials, German medical doctors responsible for conducting inhuman, unethical medical experiments on prisoners in concentration camps were tried. One of the results of the discussions around the trial was the development of a 10-point document known as the Nuremberg Code, which states the conditions for legitimate medical research. This document is considered as a landmark point in the history of medical research ethics and had a massive influence on global human rights, recognizing autonomy and dignity of human subjects as well as the principles of harm avoidance and respect. The concept of informed and uncoerced consent is the cornerstone of the Nuremberg Code. This is the given definition. The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. According to this definition, consent validity requires, first, competence and capacity, second, adequate information, and third, voluntariness. This concept is now assumed as a standard ethical requirement for any kind of research that involves humans. Further ethical issues arise if research involves vulnerable and/or non-competent subjects. There may be a need for research to involve vulnerable subjects, for example, children, to study their behavior and their learning progress in special circumstances, like interaction with technological devices. At the same time, researchers must offer special protection to vulnerable participants. In this example, informed consent must be expressed by parents. I will not discuss the topic more. You should go deeper into the subject if you will ever be involved in research with children, or, more generally, vulnerable subjects. The principles of privacy and confidentiality also raise key ethical issues. The two terms are often used interchangeably, although they are related but not equivalent concepts. Privacy refers to the right to control access to oneself. It includes physical privacy, such as ensuring that curtains are closed during physical examinations, and information privacy, ensuring that personal information only flows through enforceable privacy principles. Confidentiality refers to information only. For example, the legal duty of confidentiality obliges healthcare practitioners to protect their patients against inappropriate disclosure of personal health information. Privacy and confidentiality often raise ethical concerns. For example, a research on how programmers' productivity varies depending on previous experience in a given programming language should never allow one to trace productivity data to a specific individual. Likewise, a research on the effect of alcohol assumption and fertility of adult males should never allow to identify a specific participant in the experiment. The key techniques used here are data protection and anonymization. The General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, issued by the European Union in operation since 2018, regulates data protection and privacy for all individuals within the EU. Most research institutions promote adoption of ethical research methods and provide an institutional review board, also known as ethics committee, whose mandate is to review ethics-sensitive research proposals submitted by researchers, to approve or reject them, and to monitor their advances. The main purpose is to assure that appropriate steps are taken to protect the rights and welfare of humans participating as subjects in a research study. It may also watch for ethical participation of animals or ethical effects on the environment, if these are relevant. Almost all countries have regulations or guidelines governing human subject studies, and ethics committees oversee them. However, the organizational responsibilities and the scope of the oversight purview can differ substantially. Before concluding, I would like to discuss the ethical implications of research by looking at a case of technological research, the development of autonomous vehicles such as driverless cars. One might look at this as an example of purely technological research, and perhaps many researchers take this approach and just focus on the technological challenges involved. The research, however, has a profound ethical implications. On the one hand, it may be viewed as a solution for the good of humans. They are liberated by a boring task like driving. It reduces the risks of accidents due to driver failures. For example, the driver falls asleep, the driver is drunk. At the same time, the researcher must realize that the automated control system being designed has to make ethical decisions. If a child suddenly crosses an intersection when the light is red, and the car enters the intersection at a speed such that the only two alternatives are invest the child or avoid entering the intersection by crashing against a guardrail, which alternative should be chosen? Potentially kill the child, who is in fault, or potentially kill the passengers of the car? This example is a rather extreme case, where there is no easy nor obvious solution to the ethical issue raised by research. The problem, however, cannot be ignored, and research decisions must be made if a researcher operates in this area. Similar ethical issues arise in cases of dual-use research, meaning that a research has the potential to be used for both good and bad ends. It is important to identify and counter bad ends before the research produces results and not after. For example, suppose that a social media researcher works on a new advanced platform. Ethics-informed research will also focus on identification of possible misuses and possible prevention mechanisms. I would like to end our discussion on research ethics by stressing again that research ethics cannot be reduced to a list of to-dos. There are general ethical principles, but their application is not straightforward. Rather, it requires careful investigation and honest assumption of personal responsibility by the researcher.